Last month, the House passed the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act. This could have a major impact in the workplace. If passed by the Senate and signed by the President, it could allow people with such conditions as epilepsy, diabetes, cancer, and other disabilities use that Disabilities Act to fight discrimination in the workplace. And here to help us get a handle on what this means is attorney Ellen Simon. Nice to have you back with us once again.
Thank you so much.
I think it might be useful to just start with the original act passed in 1990, I think. What did that provide for?
Well, that was monumental legislation that protected people with disabilities from discrimination in the workplace. So it affected millions and millions of people who were able to work and not being able to get jobs or getting fired from jobs because of their disabilities. So the intent was, like the other civil rights acts, to prevent discrimination against individuals in employment and provide equal opportunity. That was the intent.
Right. And people may associate it, for example, with the wheelchair ramps that have to be present in all public buildings.
Right. It also affected, to a great extent, places of public accommodation, and that is how people mostly associate it. We see changes in bathrooms and public buildings and ramps, but the amendments that are being introduced now have to do with discrimination in employment.
All right. So why the need then for this Amendments Act? How does it expand on the original ADA?
Well, what has happened with the ADA, although the intent was certainly pure and good and necessary, the way that the legislation was written and the way that it's been interpreted has really excluded people with disabilities from coverage under the Act. And it's basically been a battleground over who is disabled. What is the meaning of a person who is disabled? What does the language mean? So what has happened has been that people who have disabilities, like cancer, AIDS, epilepsy, many people with neurological illnesses, many people have been held by the courts in interpreting the statute to not be disabled, and therefore they have had no protection under the Act.
And one of the ways they would be considered not disabled is that if they have epilepsy, for example, but they're taking medication that controls the symptoms.
Correct. Now, what occurred with respect to what's called mitigating measures is that the United States Supreme Court decided a case that held, in interpreting the Americans with Disabilities Act, that if the condition is controlled with medication or with a device. In other words, if they're mitigating measures that make the person, that control the symptoms, then they are no longer disabled and not covered by the Act. So this decision by the United States Supreme Court has effectively excluded, again, people with epilepsy, people with diabetes who take insulin, people who use a prosthetic device for their leg, and therefore they are now able to walk. So it's had a very negative effect on people who have disabilities. So this legislation specifically overrules that Supreme Court decision and says, and the Congress has said, we reject that decision and we want to broadly cover people with disabilities.
Clear up some of the gray area
there.
All right. Well, we appreciate you trying to explain this for us. I think I understand it, but it is complicated.
It is, and it's very important and affects millions and millions of people.
If you'd like more information, or if you would like to contact Ellen Simon, call 216-575-1002. She is an attorney with McCarthy, Levitt, Crystal, and Liffman in Cleveland. And we also have a link on newsnet5.com. Ellen, thanks again.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Let's go over to Suzanne now with a look at a pretty steamy forecast today.